Hi there, good morning. Hi. I'm Leslie Maitland, chair of the Amram Scholar Series. Rabbi Lustig is out of town, and so it is my very great pleasure to welcome you here today and to introduce our speaker, renowned comedy writer Alan Zweibel. Now, many of you who came today expecting our customary academic fare may be a bit surprised by today's program. No, and to prove that wrong, I can only say that everyone who seriously analyzes our current fraught political situation in Washington these days knows that there are two things that we really need to cultivate: faith in God and a sense of humor. And when it comes to comedy, Alan Zweibel, who studied from the best and also earned an honorary doctorate from the State University of New York, is ably prepared to teach us how to laugh, especially at ourselves. The winner of 5 Emmy Awards for his work in television and the 2006 Thurber Prize for American Humor for his novel, The Other Shulman, he has earned a place in the pantheon of American pop culture, to quote the New York Times. Alan's talk today on the timely subject of Pesach is based on his bestseller, For This We Left Egypt, a Passover Haggadah for Jews and those who love them. Co-authored with Dave Barry and Adam Mansbach, it provides an irreverent guide to our Seder liturgy and rituals. With unique interpretations of our practices to enliven your Seder table, it provides a joyful take on Jewish history and traditions that is fun reading as a group and also a great Afikoman Prize.
That's a great idea.
Yeah. Hide lots of matzah. Among his 9 other books is indeed a popular children's story, Our Tree Named Steve. Born in Brooklyn and reared in Woodmere, Long Island, Alan got his first major break at the age of 24 in 1975. That's when he met Lorne Michaels, who hired him as one of the original writers on the Saturday Night Live show, working with John Belushi, Dan Aykroyd, Chevy Chase, and Gilda Radner. With Gilda, he created such memorable comic characters as the busybody broadcaster Rosanna Dana. He went on to co-create and produce It's Gary Shandling's Show, and to write for other programs, including The David Letterman Show and Curb Your Enthusiasm. In addition to his multiple Emmys, he has won TV Critics Awards, and in recognition of the diversity of his work, the Writers Guild of America in 2013 presented him with a Lifetime Achievement Award. A frequent guest on late-night talk shows, Alan has also worked on the Tony Award-winning play 700 Sundays with Billy Crystal, on Martin Short's Broadway hit Fame Becomes Me, and on the off-Broadway play Bunny Bunny, Gilda Radner, a sort of romantic comedy, which he adapted from his best-selling memoir of their close friendship. His humor has appeared in The New Yorker, Esquire, The Atlantic Monthly, The New York Times, The Huffington Post, and Mad Magazine. Currently, Alan is preparing his play Bunny Bunny for a return to the New York stage and writing a memoir entitled Laugh Lines, 40 Years Trying to Make Funny People Funnier. You can see why he gets up at 5:30 in the morning, he tells me. A documentary that he produced, Love Gilda, will premiere on the opening night of this year's Tribeca Film Festival on April 18th. The proud father of 3 and grandfather of 5, he comes to us today in cooperation with the Jewish Book Council. Now please silence your cell phones as I give you Alan Zweibel's take on the Passover Haggadah.
That was great. Thank you. There's like a Torah in there, right? Well, this is going to get a little hairy at times, okay? Thank you, Leslie, for that introduction, and I'm thrilled to be here, thrilled to be at your temple, thrilled to be in Washington, and I've been having this book tour. I've been all over South Florida, Speaking in front of Jews is not new to me, okay? But a little bit about myself before we get to the book. When I listen to that introduction and I think about everything that's happened to me and what I've been allowed to do with this profession, I'm very humble, I'm very grateful. And I also find a certain amount of irony in the whole thing because originally it was not even my idea to become a comedy writer. This was a decision that was made for me about 40 years ago by every law school in the United States. I went to the University of Buffalo, late 60s, early 70s, and I got pretty decent grades, but they made you take this test called the law boards, the LSATs. And I don't know how they grade it now. Maybe it's still the same, but back then they graded from 200 to 800. If you can write your name, you got a 200. If you were Einstein, you got an 800. If you were Alan Zweibel, you got a 390, which reclassified me as mineral, like right away. I remember going back to Long Island and telling my Long Island Jewish parents that I got a 390 on the law boards. And about a week later, this is after they uncovered the mirrors, you know. And got up off of those little wooden stools they were sitting on. My dad gave me $1,000, which I then took and I handed over to a man named Stanley Kaplan. Okay. For those of you who may not know who Stanley Kaplan is, he's a guy who's got these schools all over the country where they teach you how to take standardized tests. And I wanted to retake the law boards. So I gave him $1,000, and for the next 6 months, I was really intent on boosting my score. You know, so I had number 2 pencils, I had those earphones, I was going through all old tests, practicing how to take it, and I retook the LSATs, and my score catapulted up to a 401. So I figured at that rate I'd be around 90 before I got into an English-speaking law school. So I started writing jokes. It seemed like the next logical thing to do. And I started writing jokes for comedians who played in the Catskill Mountains. You're familiar with what they are. But back then, like in the 50s and 60s, that was the breeding ground of comedy. That's where it all started. That's where Buddy Hackett and Alan King and Toady Fields, even Joan Rivers and Dean Martin and Jerry Lewis, they all came through the Catskills, honed their skills as comedians, and went on to become big stars. By the time I got there, in the early 70s, the only people who were left telling jokes were the ones who weren't going anywhere, okay? I wrote jokes for every Morty, Dickie, Freddie, and Lee that ever lived, and they paid me $7 a joke. That was the going rate. I'm 21 years old. I had moved back in with my parents after college. All my friends were in medical schools, law schools, dental schools, and I'm living at home with my parents and writing jokes for people who were twice my age. It was like writing for my parents' friends. You want to hear a $7 joke? I'm at home, phone rings, a comedian named Morty Gunty calls and said, Alan, sperm banks. I said, what about him? He says, can you write me some sperm bank jokes? So I'm 21. You're like, I gave a damn about sperm banks. I go, okay, fine. He's 45, right? So the first joke that I ever wrote that I got $7 for, I had written a joke saying they have a new thing now called sperm banks, which is just like an ordinary bank, except here, after you make a deposit, you lose interest. So now the word spreads through the Catskills of this young kid who's got sperm bank jokes. I said, how did I become this guy, you know? Another comedian called up named Freddie Roman. And he said, hey, I hear you write great sperm bank jokes. Can I have one? So for him, because they were starting to freeze sperm. And I looked into the future and I said, this could be a problem because it's hard enough telling a kid he's been adopted. How do you tell him he's been defrosted, I'm living with my parents. My friends are all in professional school. And to supplement this great living I was making as a comedy writer, I got a job in a delicatessen on Hillside Avenue in Queens, okay? You name it, I sliced it for about 2 years. And on the strength of the sperm bank jokes, my price went to $10, then $12. The most I ever got for any one joke was $18. I got high for a joke I had written about a new porno movie that was coming out where the entire cast were Hasidic Jews. And it was really unusual, especially the orgy scene, because the men were on one side of the room and the women were on the other. I was dying up there. These guys were very good commercial comedians, okay? They all looked nice. They were all good joke tellers, and they were funny men, very nice guys. But the Catskills were now dead comedically, and all the guys that were left behind, one of the reasons they were still there was they didn't have any distinct personalities. There was no persona. They were joke tellers, so if one guy didn't like the joke, he gave it to another guy. There was no character, Jack Benny was the cheap guy. Everybody had, all the classic guys, they had a personality that we were able to hook into. Years later, when I wrote for a guy like, let's say, Rodney Dangerfield, that was easier because he had a character. He had that I don't get no respect thing. So it was easy for me to have him say, even as an infant, I didn't get any respect. My mother wouldn't breastfeed me. She said she liked me as a friend. You see, that was a lot easier. It was easy to have Rodney say, no one in my family ever got any respect. He said, during the Civil War, I had an uncle who fought for the West. You see, that was easy, okay? And I'm going nowhere fast. And I'm now, let's say, 40 years old. And I'm saying, this isn't the place to be. Where should I go? What's the new Catskills? What's the new breeding ground? And there were 2 clubs in New York City in the 70s. One called The Improvisation, the other one called Catch a Rising Star, which was on the Upper East Side. And there you had guys, this was the new launching pad. This is where Freddie Prinz, this is where Lily Tomlin and Bette Midler and David Steinberg and Robert Klein and Richard Pryor and my pal Larry David, they were coming through. This was the new spot. This is where the agents and the managers were hanging out. This is where the TV executives were. So I had a plan. I took all the jokes that these old guys wouldn't buy from me because it wasn't for their audience, and I made it into a stand-up act for myself. And my experiment was going to be go on stage, deliver the jokes, and with the hope that somebody, like a manager or an agent, would like the writing and want to represent me to maybe become a TV writer, which is what I wanted to do at the time. The first week that I'm there, I meet a guy who's just starting out. His name is Billy Crystal, okay? He lives 3 towns over from my parents. We lived in Woodmere. He lived in Long Beach, Long Island, and we became fast friends. And he picked me up every night at my parents' house, in a Volkswagen, and we went into the city, told our jokes, and then on the way home, we would listen to the cassettes and critique each other how we did. I'm about 4 months into this experiment, and there's one night, it's like 1 o'clock in the morning, and I'm on stage having the hardest time in the world making these 6 drunks from Des Moines laugh. And I'm depressed. I get off the stage. I sit at the bar. I'm schwitzing like a pig, and I'm just shaking my head. And I'm waiting for Billy to get done so he can drive me home. And while I'm sitting there, a guy comes over and sits down next to me and just starts staring at me. And I finally go, what? What do you want? He goes, "You're the worst comedian I've ever seen in my life." And I said, "Well, I really need to hear that now, thank you, because it's really helping my ego with what I'm going through." She says, "But your material isn't bad. Did you write it?" I said, "Yeah." He said, "Can I see more of it?" I said, "You bet." I mean, I didn't even ask who this was. At this point, I would have shown it to like a gardener, you know? Ends up, this is Lorne Michaels, who, this is April of '75, he's going from club to club in New York looking for writers and actors for this new show that he was going to premiere in the fall called Saturday Night Live. I go back to Long Island, Woodmere, sit at my parents' kitchen table, and for 2 days type up what I believed were 1,100 of my best jokes. And the typewriters, you know, was the kind that had the keys, and then they got caught, you got to take it apart, and then there was the ink, you know, it was all of that. It was a nightmare, okay? So 2 days later, I'm ready, I have to go to the city for my meeting with Lorne. And I was so nervous, I didn't even know what to wear to this interview. So I'm thinking, gee, young, hip producer, young, hip show. Oh, I know. I'll dress young. I'll dress hip. I put on my father's maroon polyester leisure suit. I looked like a big blood clot sitting on the Long Island Railroad, took the train into the city, and if memory serves, he was at the Plaza Hotel. My meeting was at 2 o'clock, but once again, I was nervous. I didn't want to be late, so I got there at 7 in the morning. And there's no cell phones, right? This is April of '75. I see a payphone. I go over to it, and I call Billy Crystal. Now, Billy had been spending time with Lorne, okay? There was even some talk that he would originally be one of the not ready for primetime players in the original cast. It didn't work out, but they had spent time together. They had gone to dinners, they went for walks, they talked comedy. So I said, "Billy, I have a meeting with this guy, Lorne. Anything you can tell me about him, you know, to give me a leg up in, you know, in this meeting?" He said, "Well, he used to write for Woody Allen. He's produced Monty Python specials. Oh, and he hates mimes. Lorne hates mimes." I went, "Okay, got it, okay." 2 o'clock, I go upstairs to his room. I sit on the edge of the bed. He pulls up a chair, and I give him this tome with 1,100 jokes in it. And he opens it. He reads the first joke, and he goes, "Uh-huh." Then he closes the book. I'm up for 2 days straight, 1,100 jokes. He reads one. And to show you how long ago this was from the reference points in the joke, I had written a joke saying that the post office was about to issue a stamp commemorating prostitution in the United States. It's a 10-cent stamp. You want to lick it, it's a quarter, you know. He said, "Very good, very good." He said, "How much money do you need to live on?" I said, "Well, I'm making $2.75 an hour at the deli. Match it." So he said, "Tell me a little bit more about yourself," which I took to mean that before he committed to this kind of cash, he wanted to know what he was buying. I said, "Well, Woody Allen's my idol. Love Monty Python. But if there's one fucking mime on this show, I am out of here." And he gave me a job, you know. And that was the big break. This was, wow, I was going to be a TV comedy writer. My dad manufactured jewelry, and his place was on 52nd Street between Madison and 5th. And I used to run errands for him, you know, like holidays from school, weekends and whatever. And even as a little kid, I used to, no matter where the errand had to go or where it came back from, I always made sure, even if it was out of the way, to go by 30 Rock, to go by Rockefeller Center. It was then called the RCA building, because upstairs, Johnny Carson had the Tonight Show, and in the 60s there was a show called That Was the Week That Was, And I figured maybe I can see some of these people who are doing what I wanted to do one day. And now, it's July 7th, 1975. I come into this building for my first day on the job as a TV comedy writer. It was every dream I ever had just came true. I just turned 25. We go upstairs to the 17th floor where Lorne had an office, and I'm looking around because there's a meeting with the writers and the actors of this new show. And I see Belushi, and I see Chevy, and I see Dan Aykroyd, Lorraine Newman, and they're improvising stuff. They were all from Second City and improv groups, and I had never seen this kind of comedy before. And it really blew me away because I was just this gag writer, essentially. I go, wow, these guys are creating things right in front of me. And I found it so overwhelming that I got nervous. I said, there's no way I can compete with these guys. So in the corner of Lorne's office was a big potted plant. I went behind it and squatted down. It's the biggest day of my life. First meeting as a TV comedy writer. I'm squatting behind a plant. The meeting starts when all of a sudden I hear a girl's voice from the other side of the plant say, "Could you help me be a parakeet?" I parted the leaves and I looked out and it was Gilda. And I said, "What?" And she said, "Yeah, I think it would be really funny if I stood on a perch and scrunched up my face and spoke like a parakeet. But I need a writer to help me figure out what the parakeet should say. Are you a good parakeet writer?" I had no idea what she was talking about, but at least somebody was talking to me. I went, "Yeah, I'm a great parakeet writer." And she said, "Good, good." She said, "Why are you hiding behind that plant? Nervous?" I said, "Yeah, I'm a little nervous." She said, "Your first TV show, Alan?" I went, "Yeah, how do you know my name is Alan?" She said, "You're the only one wearing a name tag." She said, "Is there any more room back there?" I said, "Yeah, what's up?" She said, "Well, this is my first TV show too, and I'm also a little nervous. So can I come back there with you?" So I scooted over, and Gilda came behind, and now we're both squatting behind this plant. And that's where I got to meet my buddy, Gilda. We got to know each other a little bit, made each other laugh, and even had our first fight back there. She asked me if I wanted gum. I said, "Yeah, I'd love some gum." She hands me a pocketbook the size of this room, okay? And she says, go take some gum. I said, "It's in there?" She said, "Yeah, just open the zipper. There's tons of gum. Take whatever you want." I said, "I can't do that." She said, "You said you wanted gum. Open the pocketbook and take some gum." I said, "I can't." And she said, "Why?" I said, "Because I'm a boy and you're a girl, and there may be some things inside of that pocketbook that will eventually end up inside of you. I'm a writer with a very vivid imagination, so yes, I do want some gum, but can you please serve it to me?" She said, "You're Jewish, aren't you?" I said a little. She says, "No, you're like a major Jew." And now we start having this tug of war with this big pocketbook, and then in the middle of this little skirmish, you hear Lorne on the other side, "Okay, where's Alan? Where's Alan? I saw him before. Where is he?" And she goes, "He wants to hear your ideas for sketches. Do you have any?" I said, "Yeah, but they stink, and I don't like talking in front of people." And she said, "Don't worry, I'll take care of it." So Gilda steps out from behind the potted plant. By the way, this is the action portion of my show. This is the car chase, okay? And she says, "Zweibel's got this great idea where I play a parakeet." She attributed her idea to me. He's got tons and tons of ideas, and come on out, Alan. So she drags me out like her, sort of handicapped little brother, and I say hello to everyone, and she says, "He's the funniest guy I ever met, and we're going to be writing partners and platonic friends forever." Now, the writing partners part I was thrilled about. I've always felt that in any platonic relationship, there's usually one person who doesn't want it to be platonic. But if these are the rules, okay, fine, I'll live by them until one day you open your eyes and see the glory that's in front of you, okay? So we started writing, and we started platonicking, I guess. And we started this new show, and it was so exciting. All of us were in our early or mid-20s. Our first jobs in TV. We were baby boomers. Lauren's theory was that there's a whole audience out there that's not being spoken to comedically. Let's just make each other laugh. And if we do, we'll put it on television, and hopefully people will like it and tell their friends. And we started this show. And it's been so many years since, and I've been very fortunate to have some wonderful things happen to me career-wise since then. This was still the most exciting time ever. It was live. It was a live television. And, you know, now I write movies and Broadway plays and books, and if I'm lucky, they see the light of day in 2 years. Here, you can write something on Monday, it's on television Saturday. You can write something on Saturday, and it's on TV that night. How it works is at 8 o'clock on Saturday night, they have a dress rehearsal for the full audience, and they do the whole show. Everybody's in costume, the musical group plays, it's the show. Then when that's over, the audience goes home, everyone goes up to Lorne Michaels' office, it's decided which sketches are gonna stay in, which are gonna not make the cut. You try to write new jokes for the sketches, okay, to make it funnier, give it the cue cards, and back then, if I had time, I would go upstairs and watch to my office and watch the 11 o'clock news. It wasn't 24/7, news. I'd go watch the 11 o'clock news, and if something struck me as funny, I'd write a joke. It'd be on TV a half hour later. Okay, as a matter of fact, I was with that show 5 years and on two different occasions while they were on the air live doing Weekend Update. I was under the desk writing jokes and handing them up, okay? And it's a high wire act. If a joke or a sketch works, you feel like a king, okay? If it doesn't, you feel like a schmuck, but you can redeem yourself because you have another show next week. And once again, the live aspect of it was the most fun because it's just out there. You can't edit it. You can't do anything. Okay, I'll give you an example. Gilda and I, on Friday nights, would go after hours. There was a place nearby, 30 Rock, in a hotel. It was a Japanese restaurant that stayed open until the wee hours of the morning. So after all the sketches were put to bed, she and I would go with legal pads and pens. And this one particular week, Lorne had asked us to write one of those Rosanna Danas for Weekend Update. So we're on our way to the restaurant. I pass a newsstand. It's 2 o'clock in the morning. And so they deliver tomorrow's newspapers. It's in a bundle. And it must have been the Daily News or the Post. The headline was, Mr. Ed dies. The talking horse on TV. As you can tell, this was not a big news day. I go to a phone. I call Lorne. I said, look, got some bad news for you. He goes, what? Mr. Ed died. He said, Alan, it's 2 in the morning. There better be more to this call than this. I said, well, let me ask you this. How about on tonight's show, we interview Mrs. Ed, the grieving widow, you know? So he says, you find a horse, and we'll do it. So now it's 2:15 in the morning, and I'm a Jew in New York looking for a horse. So I call the guy in charge of props, Gentile, and I say, listen, it's Zweibel. I need a horse for the show tonight. He says, what kind? What kind? I don't know, 4 legs, a tail, teeth, a regulation horse. He says, Alan, there's Pintos, there's Mustangs, there's Clydesdales, there's Palominos. What do you want? So I think for a second, I go, listen. Picture Mr. Ed. Who would he choose for a bride? Get me that horse. I go home, I go to sleep, I wake up, I have some breakfast, brush my teeth, get to the studio, it's like 8 in the morning, and there's a horse. Looked very much like Mr. Ed, I might add. Bill Murray is now one of the anchor people on A Weekend Update. So I wrote a sketch where he would interview Mrs. Ed on her way home from the funeral, okay? And we put it into the 8 o'clock dress rehearsal. And it was, really adorable because we gave her a black hat and a veil on the horse. And we put Gilda as the voice of Mrs. Ed in Don Pardo's announce booth. And how it works is they put molasses on the horse's mouth. And so when the horse goes to lick it off, the camera cuts to that angle. And you didn't think the horse really spoke, did you? Gilda would speak as the horse. So in the dress rehearsal, Bill said to the horse, did he suffer much? And Gilda had him say, no, he went quickly, Bill. And, oh, wow, this could work. Let's put it on the live show tonight. I have no idea what happened to this horse between dress rehearsal and the moment that he saw the red light come on the camera and he knew he was on live TV. But he started, running in circles. We don't have any dialogue for this. Who knew this would happen? And Gilda, the improv lady, is going, oh, I'm so upset, I'm chasing my tail, Bill. At one point, the horse breaks rank, leaves the studio, runs down a hall of NBC. Lauren says to a cameraman, follow that horse. And Gilda ad-libs, oh, I'm so upset, I'm going to throw myself out a window, Bill. Now, had this been an ordinary show and not live, we would have redone it, we would have edited it, we would have cut it out entirely, but it was live, it was out there, and that's how it worked. It was very, very exciting. I mean, even with the censors, I'll give you a couple of stories there. Now, you got to understand, this is going to sound incredibly tame, given what television is now, all the different outlets and cable and Netflix and everything. But back then, CBS, NBC, ABC, that was television. There wasn't even Fox. Those were like good days. There wasn't, there wasn't even, those 3 networks were television. So for us to get something on the air, we had to use, like I said, it will sound tame, but a little bit of cunning. We had a censor. Her name was Jane Crowley. She was 300 pounds, ex-nun, dress shields. You know who I'm talking about, okay? And I had helped create a character for Gilda called Emily Latella. Emily Latella was a little old lady based on a nanny that Gilda had growing up who was hard of hearing, okay? And so she would come on Weekend Update and she would rail on and on about editorials that she misheard. So she would do a rant about saving Soviet jewelry, okay? Violins on television instead of violence on television. The Eagle Rights Amendment instead of equal rights. I think it, and then she would be corrected. No, it's not eagle rights, it's equal rights. She said, oh, that's very different. And then she looked at the camera and go, never mind, okay? And it worked well. It was starting to wear thin. I think the lowest we ever got was presidential erections, okay? And then everyone said, maybe we should put this character on the shelf for a while because it's enough already. I found the character really charming. and I wanted to extend the shelf life. So in this particular dress rehearsal, I think, if I'm not mistaken, oh God help us, she was railing on and on about saving endangered feces, okay? And she's going, well, why do you want to save it? Where are you going to keep it? What are you going to do with it? So then she's interrupted and corrected and said, no, it's endangered species, not feces, species. And she go, oh, that's quite different. Looked at the camera, never mind. And the dress rehearsal audience was getting a little tired of it, so there was like this Rachmanis kind of clap, okay? But what I did is I extended the piece. I extended it. I had Jane Curtin, who is now the anchor person, say to her, you come on here every week, you get it wrong, you rail on and on, blathering, like an idiot, you undermine our credibility, you have no credibility, I don't want to ever see you here again. Do you understand? I am making myself clear. And Gilda, as Emily Latella said, crystal clear. And then under her breath, she said, bitch. The door to the control room where the censor sits, okay, comes waddling out, okay, and she finds me and she says, Alan, you can't do that when we go on the air. You can't do what? He says, you can't say bitch on television. I say, Jane, when Gilda says bitch, she's actually using the adverb form of the word. In effect, she's saying, Jane, you are acting bitchy toward me. That's an adverb. I've heard that before. She's not saying, Jane, you are a bitch, which is a noun. And I agree, should never be on television. This is the adverb. She bought this crock of shit. I couldn't repeat it again if you put a gun to my head, okay? Another instance with this big censor. And her job, once again, was to sit in the control room and go over the script during dress rehearsal, go over each line that we're going to do. This was her last chance at censoring us, because you go on live, it's just out there. This was her last shot to rein us in. Michael O'Donoghue was one of the key writers on the show when it first started, a brilliant guy who helped found the National Lampoon. And I'm now producing the Weekend Update segment of the show. And he calls me up, he says, Alan, what if we have Weekend Update brought to you by a product that we make up? I said, go for it, okay? So this particular show, he had Don Pardo say, and now Weekend Update brought to you by Pussy Whip, the dessert topping for cats. I don't know what you guys were thinking, but it was the dessert topping for cats. And it worked great. It worked so great that I wanted to do one the following week. So in dress rehearsal, I had Don Pardo say, and now Weekend Update brought to you by Blue Balls. B-L-E-U, Bleu Balls, the cheese snack from France. It worked really, really good. And I wanted to do, everyone loved it, except one person. The door to the control room opens, and out waddles Jane Crowley, okay? And she comes up to me and says, Alan, we can't do that when we go on the air live. I said, can't do what? She said, you can't say blue balls. And I said, why? And she says, because it has to do with the male genitalia. And I say, Jane, last week, you let us say pussy whip, which is clearly the female genitalia, but now this week, what kind of sexist organization are you running here? She says, give me a minute. She goes back to the control room, picks up a phone, calls God, I guess. And she comes back out 5 minutes later and says, Alan, I gave it a lot of thought, and I've come to the conclusion that because I gave you pussy whip last week, I'll be more than happy to give you blue balls this week. And I said, that's not really necessary. Just let us say it on TV. We'll call it even. I stayed with the show for 5 years. I met my wife, Robin, who worked on the show. And we decided to stay in New York once we got married. And that's where I found a lot of my comedy right after Saturday Night Live was from this marriage. Robin and I made the mistake of thinking that Jews from Long Island and Jews from New Jersey were the same species. Apparently they're not, and they both have different rules as to who pays for what at the wedding. And our parents never discussed it, figuring that their rules applied. So at our wedding, we had no flowers and 2 bands, okay? And this started this lovely relationship between my wife and my mom, which still exists to this very day. And I've analyzed it. It's been a big source of grief and problems. And when I analyzed it, the only explanation that I can come up with is that my mother never accepted the fact that I didn't marry one of my sisters, okay? And the families, my God. I mean, when we were doing SNL, Robin was a production assistant. And we had a sketch once. Kirk Douglas was the host of the show, and there was a bar mitzvah sketch. And he played the bar mitzvah boy's grandfather. So he was on the dais, also on the dais with Gilda and Belushi and Aykroyd, all the stars of the show. But Robin's job was to fill all the other tables with extras. Our moms hadn't met at this point. Robin meant well, but she had no way of knowing, no one had any way of knowing, that my mother would throw a fit when she realized that Robin's mother had a better table at the bar mitzvah sketch, okay? Like I said, we stayed in New York. I wrote my first play. I wrote a book, which I'll get to in a little bit. And Gilda and I, there was no emails back then, so it was phone calls, and she married Gene Wilder, and she was doing movies, and we were in New York. And so the friendship, the platonic friendship, just started, diminishing a little bit. There was very little contact until 1986. I wrote a pilot called It's Gary Shandling's Show with Gary Shandling. And I went out to L.A. We were living in New Jersey. I left Robin for about a month or so, went out to work on this pilot with Gary Shandling, and I figured I could jumpstart my friendship with Gilda. So I'd call her, and we'd make a date, and at the last minute, she would always cancel. This happened 3 or 4 times. And I spoke to Robin. I said, I don't think Gilda wants to be my platonic friend anymore. She just keeps on breaking these dates. She said, stay right where you are. Robin calls me back in 10 minutes, and she says, call Gilda. I go, no, I hate her. As you can see, I'm very mature, okay? She says, call her right now. I just got off the phone with her. So I called Gilda, and I said, Robin said we have to speak. What's going on? She says, hi, Zweibel. I said, Gilda, what's going on? What are you breaking all these dates for? What's happening? She said, I don't feel well. And I go, well, what's wrong? She says, well, I have Epstein-Barr virus. Do you know what that is? And I said, yeah, it's like mono, right? And she said, I'm telling you, Zweibel, my head wants to do everything that my body, that it always did, but my body just won't let me. I said, well, what did the doctors say? She said, well, the doctors say that it's definitely Epstein-Barr, and it's got to run its course. She then asked, when are you going to be out here again? And I said, well, if this pilot becomes a series, I'll be back out in around 6 weeks to hire a staff and start this show. She says, call me when you come back out. So I went back to New Jersey. We now had 2 children. We had built a home there. And 6 weeks later, I moved out to L.A. And I don't know how much you know about L.A. This may come as a shock to you, but it's a pretty status-conscious town. And when it comes to homes, the bigger the star that you either rent from or buy from helps your status in the town. I rented a house from Larry Fine of the Three Stooges. The rent checks were made out to him. There was like a dent in the wall in the living room, and I figured, oh, Mo must have done that. And so I'm moving in, and the guys are coming in with the rented furniture, and they're just like the welcome wagon. I look at the door, and there's Gilda holding a big potted plant. And she came in, and we put it in the corner, and I looked at her, and I said, you look beautiful, honey. How you feeling? And she says, Zweibel, I just found out I don't have Epstein-Barr virus. I said, great, we can go to dinner, we can go to the movies. And she says, I have cancer. I said, what? She said, I have ovarian cancer, Zweibel, and I need you to help me get through this part of my life. I said, what should I do? And she said, make me laugh. And that was my role in my friend's life when she got sick. I would tell her jokes on the phone. Gary Shandling and I would do a show every week, send her the tape like a Hallmark card. I don't know what horror that she visited when she was alone or when we were off the phone, but all she wanted to do was laugh. She wanted to be positive. You go to her house, and on her refrigerator were pictures of me and Robin and our kids, Martin Short and his wife and kids, Harold Ramis and his wife and their kids. And she became a symbol of how you can live a fruitful existence no matter what you have. She went to the movies. We went to Laker games. She was on the cover of Life magazine. And we were walking on the beach one night discussing whether or not she would be on It's Gary Shandling show. She really liked the show, and Gary and she wanted to work together. But she was afraid, hadn't been on TV at this point in 7 years, that nobody in the studio audience would recognize her. And I was in the middle of just about ready to say to her, don't be silly, when she said, but you know something, I have to do your show. My comedy is the only weapon I have against this fucker. That's what she referred to her disease as. She personalized it. She said, Zweibel, can you help me make cancer funny? Which is a sentence you don't hear a lot. And the night of the show, we didn't tell the audience that she was a surprise guest. And there's 300 people in the studio, and she's behind the door, ready to enter. Shandling is doing a monologue. There's a knock at the door. He opens it. She walks through and says, hi, Gary. And he goes, hey, everybody, it's Gilda. 300 people she didn't think would recognize her erupted in laughter and applause like I've never heard before. And then she started doing some of the jokes that we had written for her. And the audience, it was amazing. At first, they sort of recoiled a little bit, but it's as if they all went through the same thought process. Oh, she's allowed to because she has it and whatever. And then they became very emotional, to the point where when I went to edit the show, TV shows are usually situation comedies done with 4 cameras shooting the same scene, different angles. And then you go into the editing room and you pick the angles and you put it together like a jigsaw puzzle. That's your show. And the angle that I wanted for her entrance, I noticed the frame was jumping just a little bit, and I couldn't figure out why. And then I remember the night we shot the show, the guy that was on that camera was crying, and his hands were shaking. So if you should ever see this episode on some cable station or wherever they show repeats, look for that, because I left it in there as a tribute. And she got nominated for an Emmy Award for this appearance, and we thought she was getting better. Then she didn't get better. And I had to keep her laughing, to the point where I went to Cedars-Sinai Hospital in L.A., and I was giving blood. And I'm on a gurney, A nurse comes over with a pad and a pen, and I go, what's this for? She says, well, Gilda likes to know whose blood she's getting. Write something nice, she's having a tough time. So I wrote, Dear Gilda, I knew I'd get some fluid of mine into you one way or another. Well, so I thought it said it sort of nicely. And then I had to deal, like we all do, with the loss of a loved one. And I don't know if it was coincidence, I don't know what it was, but all the success that I had at the beginning, now I was sort of derailed a little bit, you know. I wrote a book, my wife Robin said, you should write about you and Gilda. And I said, no, I don't want to materialize or capitalize on our friendship. She said, to hell with that, your best friend died. You should write about it. So as a form of catharsis, I guess, I wrote a book called Bunny Bunny, and it reconstructed everything I could remember about our relationship. Where did we meet? Oh, behind the plant. And it was she talks, I talk, she talks, I talk. It was 220 pages of dialogue through everything I can remember, all the way up to a eulogy that I gave at her memorial. And it was just dialogue. I didn't want it to be paragraphs. I wanted the words to sort of touch each other one more time. And then I figured, okay, catharsis is over. I showed the pages to Mel Brooks and Carl Reiner and people who knew Gilda, people who knew me and Gilda, and they urged me to publish it. And I resisted, and then I said, okay, it's a nice tribute. I wanted three conditions. I wanted Gene Wilder's blessing. So I sent it to him, and he called me. He says, I hope you're publishing this. I go, okay. I sent it to Gilda's brother and mother. They wrote back and said the same thing. They only had one correction, because I had written in there that Gilda's father was a giant of a man. Ends up he was like 5'3". Okay? I totally got this wrong, you know. But they gave me their blessing, and then I called Gene Wilder and I said, listen, what do I do with any advance or any proceeds I get for this book? I said, what should I do with the money? And he says, give it to Gilda's Club. And Gilda's Club was just forming at the time. In Gilda's name, it's a cancer support community for cancer patients and the families. And that was that. The book was a bestseller. It was a play. As Leslie said in the introduction, it may be coming back to New York on Broadway next year. But with the exception of that, everything I touched, just, I couldn't get arrested. TV shows that I created got canceled. And remember I said earlier that I had written a book, my first book. Oh, God. Our son Adam was 7 years old. And he'd sit across from the dinner table from me and Robin. And just by the expression on his face, you can tell the kid was thinking, I can do better than these two, you know? So I wrote a book about a 9-year-old boy who didn't feel appreciated by his parents and declared himself a free agent and went all over the world offering his services as a devoted son to the highest bidding parents. The book did okay, but before it was even published, I sent the galleys to my friend Rob Reiner, who had hosted the third Saturday Night Live, because I just wanted, you know, a quotation. I wanted a blurb for the book cover. He calls me up. He says, Alan, I love this. He says, you know, I'm a director now. He had directed Spinal Tap, When Harry Met Sally, A Few Good Men. I went, yeah, no kidding. You're a director, I know. He said, let's make a movie. Well, this is music to a writer's ears, to write a book and to be hired to write the screenplay. We moved out to L.A., okay, and it took me 2 years to write the screenplay. It was a $50 million movie, okay? Bruce Willis, Elijah Wood, Julia Louis-Dreyfus, Jason Alexander, my old friend Dan Aykroyd, and there was an 8-year-old actress who was her first movie named Scarlett Johansson was in it, all right? And it's the biggest night of my life, this big Hollywood premiere. I flew my parents out from Boca. Boca had 2 less Jews this particular night. And it's the greatest night of my life until the next morning when the reviews came out. Now, for those of you who may not remember Roger Ebert's review of the movie North, or carry it with you, this is what the most influential critic, film critic in the country, thought of my film. I hated this movie. Hated this movie. Hated it. Hated every simpering, stupid, vacant, audience-insulting moment of it. Hated the sensibility that thought anyone would like it. Hated the implied insult to the audience by its belief that anyone would actually be entertained by it. Now, on the surface, this may seem like an unfavorable review, but if you'll read it again, I think you liked it. It was horrible. It was horrible. We were living in Los Angeles where everybody roots for everybody else's failure. Robin would go to the, to the supermarket where she would be taunted by other housewives. She'd come home and say, maybe we should order in for a while. Our son Adam came home from school and said, Dad, is it okay if we change our last name to Sorkin? And I'm going, And like I said, one bad thing after another, until one day I saw a sign that said, you too can complete a marathon. The sign was in a Ben & Jerry's in LA, and I went home and I told Robin about this sign. She said, you should do that. I said, do what? She said, you should run a marathon. I said, I'd like to remind you, we're Jewish. At best, we run for a bus. Bus stops, opens the door, get in, sit down, end of run. This is 26.2 miles. She said, no, you need to accomplish something. You need to be proud of, you need a goal that you should accomplish. You're getting fat, you're lying on the couch, you're scaring the kids. So I joined a training group, I entered, and I ran the New York City Marathon. Now, before you become unduly impressed, I'd like to examine the word ran for just a second. For those of you not familiar, the New York City Marathon goes through all 5 boroughs. It starts in Staten Island, you go over the Verrazano Bridge, Brooklyn, Queens, Manhattan, the Bronx, back to Manhattan, into Central Park, Tavern on the Green, 26.2 miles later, you've run a marathon. Marathon Sunday, I go. I line up with 34,000 other runners. On your mark, get set, go. I leave Staten Island. I go over the Verrazano Bridge. And now I'm in Brooklyn, about 4 miles into the race, when word comes back that the winner had not only crossed the finish line, but was already on a plane back to Kenya, okay? And I'm schlepping my ass through Brooklyn. It was a nice day. But running the marathon, being a native New Yorker, it was like running through my life. I was born in Brooklyn. My dad worked in Manhattan. The Yankees were in the Bronx, And you get these sense memories. The endorphins kick in, and you get these sense memories that you forgot about that took place in some of these locations. And the greatest sense memory that I had was when I was running through Queens, because all of a sudden I remembered an incident, because my favorite singers growing up were from Queens, Simon and Garfunkel. And that's where they lived. And I remember loving their songs, marveling at Paul Simon, how he was able to write these lyrics that he put to music that somehow captured all of my feelings. And I venerated him so much and loved his lyrics so much that when I was in college taking a poetry writing course that I was failing, for our last journal entry, I submitted the lyrics to the song The Boxer. We had a 92-year-old teacher, Dr. Nora Rent, figured there's no way she's going to recognize this. So I hand in The Boxer. Monday comes, hands back our journals. The good news was she did not recognize it, okay? The not so great news was she was so impressed, she wanted me to come up and read it to the rest of the class. And I'm going, look, I'm glad you like my poem, but I don't like talking in front of people. It's fine. And, the Vietnam War was raging. Had I failed this class, I would have failed out of college, and God knows what would have happened to me. And she's urging me to read it to the class. And in the class are all my friends. They're all 20 and 21. And they all have record collections. And I'm about to go up and read the liner notes to the biggest selling album of the year. It won 9 Grammy Awards. So I go up to the front of the class with my poem. I check out the time, notice that there were 40 minutes still left in the class, so there's no chance of me running out the clock. Took one more look at my 92-year-old teacher. Was very disappointed to see she was still alive. And I start reading. I am just a poor boy, though my story seldom told. I have squandered my resistance for a pocket full of mumbles such a promises. All lies and jest, still a man hears what he wants to hear and disregards the rest. I take a breather, I look over the page, all my friends are going, 92-year-old teacher is beaming at this Jew who somehow captured the grittiness of New York streets. And she goes, continue. When I left my home and my family, I was no more than a boy in the company of strangers in the quiet of the railway station running scared. Laying low, seeking out the poorer quarters where the ragged people go, looking for the places only they would know. And that's when it happened. That's when all the other kids in the class started singing, lie, la, lie, lie, la, lie, 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 la, lie, lie, la, lie. I can't even begin to tell you what the pit of my stomach felt like, but the most unusual reaction by far was the 92-year-old teacher who went, it's inspiring, isn't it? Just as an addendum, the marathon I completed, and my friend Billy Crystal, my friends helped me out. Billy Crystal asked me to co-write 700 Sundays with him. My friend Larry David, Curb Your Enthusiasm, Martin Short, the same thing. And I got my footing again, and things are going swimmingly right now, I must say. And just as a little coda to what I had mentioned earlier, I had always wondered what it would be like if I ran into Roger Ebert. Had no idea, and it was about 10 years after he gave me that glorious review when I had written a book and I was on book tour and I was in Chicago and having dinner with an editor or a publicist, and at that table over there was Roger Ebert. He lived in Chicago. And he was wearing this sweater, this oversized sweater with all the autumn colors, browns and gold and burnt orange and mucus green. It was, and he got up and he went towards the men's room. And it's an out-of-body experience. I said, gee, I wonder what Alan's going to do. I got up and I followed him. And like I said, I had no plan. I had no idea what was going to happen. I was just praying that it wouldn't involve the police somehow. He goes to the men's room. I go to the men's room. Now we're both at the sink looking into the mirror. And I go, Raja? And he looks up. And I see he's trying to place me, but he doesn't know. And I go, Alan Zweibel. The blood drains from his face. And I say, Raja, I just have to tell you that I hate that sweater you're wearing. And he laughed and I laughed and we shook hands, and that story sort of had a happy ending, I guess. Books. One of the great things that I've been able to, that Saturday Night Live and some of the other successes have been afforded me the opportunity to do, is to write books. And it's funny, my grandparents, who are immigrants, in their mindset, television was one thing, films were another, but if you can get something published, you were a writer. You weren't a writer until you had something published. And I've written 11 books, and a couple of years ago, I met Dave Barry. You know who he is, right? Steve Martin was being honored at the Kennedy Center with the Mark Twain Award. I went down there. I helped Larry David write his speech. Dave Barry was a presenter, so he and I met. We became friends. Our wives became friends, and we decided to write it together. He lives in Coral Gables, Florida. I was living in Short Hills, New Jersey. How do you write a novel with somebody who's so far away? We wrote a novel called Lunatics about two soccer dads who had a feud, and so we each alternated chapters. He was one soccer dad, I was the other, and it was very successful. There's another guy named Adam Mansbach, who I met at the Tucson Book Festival a few years ago when I gave the keynote there. About 4 years ago, he had written a children's book that sold a gazillion copies. The name of the book is Go to Fuck to Sleep, okay? And if you haven't read it, I mean, this is what young parents of toddlers and young kids give each other, because this is everything you're thinking about. And if you Google it, if you do his book, audio version, it's Samuel L. Jackson, which is threatening this kid. So he and I wrote some books together, and then I introduced them to Dave, and we decided, hey, the three of us, why don't we do something? So now you have me in Jersey, Dave Barry in Florida, and Adam lives in Berkeley, different sides of the country. What are we going to do? Adam came up with this idea, let's do a parody of the Haggadah. And I jumped on at the opportunity right away. First of all, I felt that it was enough already with the blue Maxwell House one. It's enough, the one that's got that little wine ring around it, And we thought that we wanted to bring it up to date a little bit, So this starts in Egypt, and we go up to Eisenhower, So we wanted to modernize it, and it was very much inspired that when we lived in California, we had a Seder that Carl Reiner and Mel Brooks were at. And Carl Reiner asked the 4 questions, and Mel said, I answered them last year, let's eat. So we took a Haggadah, and we all bought the same on Amazon, and we took the table of contents. I want to write the golden calf. Okay, you want to write the parting of the Red Sea. And, we did it that way. We were never in the same room. We had 100 pages, gave it to our agent, sold it, and then we have a Haggadah. And like I said, it's been modernized just a bit. For example, the 10 plagues: blood, humidity, frogs, nervousness, lice, constipation like you wouldn't believe, locusts, Jerry Lewis, boils, and gluten. So you see, we brought it forward somewhat. And this came out last year, was a bestseller. So, doing it this year at the Jewish Book Festivals. I was just with Adam and David down in Florida. Now we're doing it individually. And the book did so well that we're writing another book together, which will come out next year. It's a guide to Judaism from Fe to Oi. So I might be back here, How are we doing? We want to do some, I think we're going to do some Q&A, all right? Okay. Okay.
I'm sure you'll all understand that I hated to interrupt that for Q&A because you were just absolutely fantastic. I have to do one little thing that I'm obliged to do, though I hate to interrupt, just to tell you what's coming next for our, and then we'll go to a couple of questions. For our next two programs, I'm really quick, on April 15th at 10:30, in honor of Israeli Independence Day, the Amram Scholar Series will present writer Francine Klagsbrunn to discuss her award-winning new biography, Lioness, Golda Meir and the Nation of Israel, about Israel's fourth prime minister, iron will leader, chain-smoking political operative, and tea and cake-serving grandmother who comes to life in this vibrant study based on newly declassified archives. And then we're going to wind up our lecture series of the year on Sunday, May 5th at 5 p.m. with a celebratory reception and another look at the special nature of Jewish humor through the ages, this time with scholars Jeremy Dauber, professor of Yiddish language and literature at Columbia University, and Michael Krasny, literature scholar and National Public Radio host, to discuss both of their latest books, which explore the range of Jewish comedy, from Twitter to back to the shtetl. Anyway, you can tell that we really felt in need of laughs when we selected this year's speakers, and now we're going to get back to Alan Zweibel to answer just a few questions, because this has been so fantastic. And so I might start with one right here, one little toughie that I have to ask him, which is, and then we have cards if people want to raise their hands. We have microphones if you want to briefly ask a question. But here's my toughest question for a Jewish comic, which is, does it worry you that impressions of Jews presented to the world through characters brought to life by comics such as Larry David on Curb Your Enthusiasm or Woody Allen with the Kvetchy, Nebbish, Neurotic, may foster negative impressions of our people among society at large? I've always wondered about that. So if you address that, and then Dan will come around, and Lainey with cards and Mike.
Here's what worries me about it. I think we lived in such a, unfortunately, politically correct culture. Any other questions? What worries me about it is that the climate right now is so PC that humor is taken out of just about everything. There was a time that we all laughed at each other. There was a time that we told jokes that were stereotypical of all ethnicities, all religions, and we all laughed at it because it was good-hearted. Now, I'm afraid that it's even more by banning that or shunning that. It's my opinion that it's even more anti-Semitic, more everything, anti-racist. It's more racist, actually, when we can't just laugh at each other. I have a 9-year-old grandson who got in trouble in 3rd grade about a month ago because his teacher overheard him say, hey, he gypped me out of a nickel. And I go, what's wrong with that? I didn't know that gypped came from gypsies. And so now we offended the gypsies? The people who come from town to town selling snake oil and stuff? So I just think that, Larry David is who he is. Okay, Woody Allen is who he is, and I love the fact that they made no bones about it, that they were true to themselves, didn't try to disguise it, just like Richard Pryor didn't, just like Chris Rock doesn't, just like Sarah Silverman doesn't. I just think that people who have who are true to who they are and don't pander, they're the funniest and they're the most honest. And I think it's our problem, quite frankly, why Jerry Seinfeld won't go to colleges right now. This is because nobody's laughing at anything. Everybody's offended at everything. So I think we should hopefully eventually chill just a little bit. I don't know if I answered your question, but that's how I feel about it.
Why are we funny?
This is a question that's been explored for many, many, many years by people much smarter than me. The only thing I can think of is that given what we've been through, we needed it. We needed the mindset just to be able to survive. I think we needed an attitude where it wasn't all gloom and doom. There's a documentary that's out now that if you haven't seen it, it's really good. It's called The Last Laugh. And it's about humor and the Holocaust, which is a phrase you never hear, right? So I'm in it, and Mel Brooks and Carl Reiner, a lot of people are interviewed, and how far can you go with it? And Mel Brooks says, when he did The Producers, he did Springtime for Hitler, but he stopped short of the Holocaust. The spine of this documentary is a 92-year-old Auschwitz survivor. Her name is Renee, something like Kaplan. And she said you needed a sense of humor to survive the camps. You couldn't have gotten through it unless, even if it was gallows humor, that's the only way you can get through it. And there's another woman in the documentary who's her friend, who's all doom and gloom and just, she went through the same thing, but her attitude was just pessimistic and negative. And this hero lady, the first one I mentioned, says to her, you got to stop. You said two 92-year-old women, one is saying to the other, you got to stop. You got your whole life ahead of you, And she says, if Hitler were to see me now, the life I lead, my family, my grandchildren, I would have the last laugh. Hence the title, The Last Laugh. And if you look at it, you can't help but, you laugh, you can't help but cry, but it's the best explanation I can give. I thought this embodied it a little bit, Yes.
I'm sorry. I have a son who's 13 years old, and he really enjoys humor. He watches Seinfeld, he watches Saturday Night Live
Sure.
on YouTube, the political clips, and I'm trying to explain to him Jewish humor
Yeah.
versus, like, say, New York humor. And I can't really figure out what I'm trying to explain to him that he's capturing that he really enjoys. So my question is, what is it about the Jewish humor, I guess, that he finds so entertaining?
Well, it's not unlike what I just said, and I always thought, quite frankly, that Jewish humor and New York humor were very similar because it's about surviving adversity. And, you walk down New York, it's tough stuff, I honestly, there have been volumes that have been written about this, and there's been no definitive conclusion. And I once again, just like I just answered, I think it's about what choices do we have? What choices do we have but to make fun of this stuff and to try to shrug it off and go forward? It's the only thing I can think of, and the political correct stuff, like I said, hampers it right now. I was on an elevator about 6-7 years ago with Mel Brooks in California, and we're going down, we're talking, the doors open, and a Indian woman, with a sari, gets on, and Mel points to the red dot on her forehead and says, "Your coffee's ready." Now, you're laughing, I laughed, and she laughed. I mean, that was the cool thing. She laughed. And I just hope those days come back again. Anyone else?
You talked about the last laugh and how Holocaust
Yes.
and humor might have helped people cope with it. Do you have any personal limits that you've drawn where you won't go?
I think that I would stop short of the Holocaust. My grandparents came here escaping that, and I wouldn't know how to do it without it being crude and disrespectful. Do you know what I mean? So different voices, different sensibilities, you set your own parameters. There's locker room talk and talk amongst the guys, and maybe I'd go over the line there because it's that. But as far as writing it or putting it out there, I can't. I personally can't do it.
Okay.
Yeah.
One more question.
For many years, I enjoyed watching Saturday Night Live, and I kept on listening for Emily Latella to talk about the right to bear arms, and she never did. And I was curious. How many of the ideas did you throw out before you decided which one to go for on a week?
Well, that's a good question when it comes to anything. You've got a big staff of writers, and everybody is coming up with ideas. Usually what we did was, if fans wrote in and had a suggestion, we didn't do it because it was like, well, we get paid for this, and if a plumber is saying something, what I mean? So we try to be ahead of the curve with our own stuff. But in any given idea, those writers' rooms are tough. They're very, very tough because it's about making the script better. It's about making the show better, no matter what show it is. And you have to have pretty thick skin because you'll pitch an idea and you think it's great, and everybody, and then go into the next. So it's tough.
Yeah.
Yes.
Hi. How can Jewish humor combat the BDS movement?
How can Jewish humor combat the?
BDS.
The boycott movement.
Yeah, no, I understand. I don't know. I think we just got to keep doing what we do. I know that's not a satisfying answer, but we've never been shy, and I don't think I think that the whole it will come around. I think the wheel will come back again. That's the only thing that I can think of. Yes.
So my question is, you succeeded in school by using a Simon and Garfunkel song. Were you on the show when Simon came out in the turkey suit?
Yes, I was on the show then. Yeah, Paul Simon, I'm thrilled to say, is a good friend of mine, and I'm also thrilled to say that he says that every time he thinks of the boxer, he thinks of me. So, thank you very much.
You wait one moment. Before you leave, I just want to let you know, Alan will be out in Edlovich Hall signing, selling books, and talking to people. There's also a great Passover expo out there with things for your Seder table. So we hope you'll meet him over at the signing table, pick up a couple of copies for your own Seder. Thank you for coming.